Thank you so much, Eugenie, that you have accepted our interview proposal.
Thanks for having me.
Good evening. Thank you so much. Eugenie, so that's a common knowledge that lots of things have occurred in our today's world recently. So I would like to switch on to our first question. The very first question will be associated with Ukrainian war. So the president-elect Donald Trump, before he won the campaign, had said that he would end with the war in Ukraine within 24 hours. How do you think could he manage, if not in 24 hours, but at least at short term, reach peace on this front?
Right. So that's, obviously a priority for the Trump administration is to end this war in Ukraine, the incoming Trump administration, I should say. Yeah, whether it happens in 24 hours, there's, plenty of reason to be skeptical, but certainly this will be a priority, I think, in next year and perhaps in the early part of next year to come to some kind of ceasefire agreement. We've obviously seen some of the negotiations that have already been happening in the lead up to that, with Trump visiting France, meeting with Zelensky, meeting with French President Macron. I think from Ukraine, the biggest issue is getting some kind of security guarantees before such a deal is reached. Preferably from Ukraine's perspective, the promise of NATO membership. Now, this is something that the Trump administration has been, I think, very hesitant on. But there's been a lot of negotiations, a lot of discussions in terms of what it would take in order to have that kind of agreement. So a lot of complicating factors, a lot of different players to take into account, but that certainly is a priority for the administration moving forward.
Syria is in the headlines of the news for last 10, 15 days. And it's also common knowledge that this country is going through another turning point of its history. The regime of Bashar al-Assad has already fallen, and the country is on the verge of great changes. What possible scenarios do you see for Syria? What future awaits this country?
Yeah, well, it's obviously a very fast-moving situation right now in Syria, so it's difficult to predict exactly how it will play out. But there are a number of different actors, both internally but also externally, that are trying to shape out this future trajectory of the country. So, we've seen obviously the formation of an interim government. Al-Jilani has become, a very important figure in this, and so we'll see how that shapes up. But there's still territorial control, issues over control of key sites, military and otherwise, that need to play out on the ground. As far as the external actors, so I think it's clear that, Russia and Iran in particular were, on the losing side of Assad's fall, given, that they had supported him all of these years. Although both countries do seem to be maneuvering to try to maintain some sort of presence or at least influence on the ground, with Russia, for example, trying to maintain its naval and air base in the country. Iran trying to build ties with whatever future government emerges as well. Turkey has stood to gain quite a bit, from this change in government. And then we see Israel acting as well to try to protect some of its own interests in the region, through airstrikes, through, seizing that buffer territory in the Golan Heights. And then the US and the Europeans basically trying to kind of see the situation out, make sure that there's some kind of stability that emerges and that there's not any kind of, whether it's IS groups or, counter, anti-Western, pro-Russia, pro-Iranian groups that kind of emerge from this instability or this transition period. So yeah, a lot going on, but it's a number of different scenarios that could play out in the future.
As long as we have already touched the Syrian situation and the conflict and the process ongoing in this country, so the next question of mine also will be associated with this country. There have been reports that the group Tahrir al-Sham has announced that it has documents obtained from the intelligence agencies of the government of Bashar al-Assad, which allegedly reveal serious ties with Israel against Iran. Iranian journalist Khayal Muazzin also claims that he had previously received similar information but could not publish it. Now I'm quoting, do you remember the Israeli attack on the Iranian embassy in Syria, where high-ranking military personnel were killed? Then Syria gave Israel the exact time of the meeting and the list of its participants. This issue was hushed up so as not to spoil the relations between these two countries. So, Evgeny, how do you assess these statements? Is there a secret alliance between Israel and Syria against Iran?
Right. So I can't speak to this specific, the specific reports about, that attack against the embassy. I think that there's a number of different factors here to consider. I mean, first of all, from Israel's perspective, the fact that Syria was, not only host to a lot of, Iranian military presence or Iran-allied groups that were supportive of Bashar al-Assad, but also served as that conduit for weaponry that gets sent into theaters like Lebanon in support of Hezbollah. So in that sense, Israel and Syria clearly would have a lot of differences there. Are there some areas of overlap? I think that's certainly possible, and I think that we're seeing right now, though, Israel's deep concern over what the emergence of any future Syrian government would look like. So Assad, I think, they had reason to be concerned, but it was an actor that Israel does know well, given how long he's been in power. Whereas, this coalition of different militant groups, opposition groups, is less well known to Israel. And I think that's why we're seeing, Israel try to carry out sort of preemptive attacks against military assets, taking out Syria's navy, things like that, just because they don't know who will eventually come into power and what that government's relationship to Israel will be like. So I certainly don't think that, Israel and Syria under Assad were best friends or anything close to that. And there was reasons to see how they were opposed to one another, but it was more predictable, from Israel's perspective.
You also know that Georgia has also captured the headlines of the news alongside with Syria. So, how do you assess, from your point of view, the situation in this country? So, what to wait? And are new elections inevitable until 28th or 29th of December, or Ivanishvili will do his best not to lose the power?
Right. So yeah, also a very fast-moving and dynamic situation right now in Georgia. So it's difficult to make short-term predictions there. What we've seen though is, quite unprecedented level of protests that have been going on, for now a couple of weeks. Obviously, this was in reaction to what many saw as a, anti-Western move by the Georgian Dream government to basically, freeze or defer the EU negotiations and the EU accession talks that Georgia had been under. So it's difficult to kind of predict in the short term the political situation. But as we've seen with other countries in the region, whether that be Ukraine, whether that be Moldova, when you have these types of actions that are going against what a large part, not the entire, but a large part of the society, of the public support, that can create some pretty significant instability, and how the government reacts to that is obviously very important. So far, the Georgian Dream government has basically maintained its stance despite these protests. We saw what happened in Ukraine, obviously, more than 10 years ago in the Euromaidan protests. So I'm not saying that that's exactly going to happen in this case in Georgia, but that is certainly a concern. So, having elections will be quite a difficult gamble, I would say, for the Georgian Dream government at this point, given how much opposition there is, at least in terms of that particular move.
Evgeny, the very last question of mine will be associated again with our region and particularly with my country. So it's also common knowledge that in the years of 2020 and 2023, Azerbaijan did carry out special military operations liberating territories that had been under Armenian occupation for last 30 years. And today the sides are too close to sign finally the peaceful treaty. And that's the topic that is on the agenda between the two countries, Armenia and Azerbaijan. But achieving this process, this goal seems very harsh and difficult. So how do you assess, in which aspects do you see the main obstacles for reaching this goal?
Right. So I think there's there's obstacles at two levels, the way that I see it. One between, directly between Armenia and Azerbaijan, a number of different points that have been negotiated, a lot of progress that's actually been made on many of those points, including border delimitation, things of that nature. But when you talk about things like constitutional changes, when there's the issue of security guarantees from Armenia's perspective, things like that. Those are still quite difficult. Hopefully, they can be overcome. But that's kind of the main issue. Internal opposition within some elements of Armenia as well is an obstacle, although the Pashinyan government has made, I think, unprecedented level of progress there. And then on the external side, I think it's no secret that, countries like Russia, to a lesser extent, Iran, would not want to see major progress here between Armenia and Azerbaijan, at least as insofar as that it could unlock a lot of different economic and diplomatic openings, east to west, a lot of connectivity projects, whether that be road, rail, energy, that I think those countries, Russia in particular, are not keen to see. So we've seen Russia sort of informally, voice its opposition, or at least try to form a stumbling block towards that peaceful settlement. This was something even when Russia was a mediator, we didn't see much progress there. So I think the fact that that progress has been, more advanced now at this stage is kind of reflective of that. So a lot of different obstacles, a lot of challenges to overcome, but I think the progress that has been made over the past year, it's pretty significant, and hopefully those last remaining hurdles can be overcome, because I think it will be beneficial not only to Armenia and Azerbaijan, but also many of the other players in the region as well.
Thank you so much, Evgeny, for your time and for your brilliant and valuable opinion and ideas that you have shared with us. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.